I made a wobble board for my son's Christmas. Our son is about 18 months old now and is fast becoming a very confident little boy who is constantly exploring his limits. We've read up on balance boards and they are great for developing balance, gross motor skills and encouraging open-ended play. And with Christmas just around the corner, we thought now would be an ideal time to build him a board. So with this board, we wanted to do things slightly differently. First of all, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for ourselves, which meant building it without a form. And then secondly, to complicate things, you can see here we've tapered in the waist of the board, and that's so that when it is in this position and the wee one's walking over, it's a lot more stable for them to do so with these sort of wider ends. Now, totally unnecessary, we just wanted to challenge ourselves. And as you're about to see, this board here was not our first attempt. We'll be making the wobble board from 4 sheets of 4mm ply, totalling 16mm thick. We got this ply from B&Q, which is the UK version of Home Depot. And this ply is awful quality, with the face veneer even being too thin to measure. And this makes sanding impossible, as even the lightest touch immediately melts through that veneer. But on the plus side, the store did at least cut it to width, so we could fit it in the car to take it home. Now we just need to cut them to size, and we're going to cut each board to a slightly different length. This is how we're going to form the arc, with perfect laminations without the need for a form. We'll stack the layers like this, so when bent, the ends should square up. Now this is important because we want to apply a ratchet strap to bend them, and we want the forces to be equal across all of the layers. Then we'll place clamps on each end before tightening the ratchets just that little bit more, and by doing this we'll be stretching the bottom ply and compressing the top ply. This will in turn force the layers together with a constant and even force. Well, that's the theory at least. We were fortunate that today the chaos machine was in nursery. Gluing up is always much easier with 2 people, and although the cold workshop gave us plenty of working time, being the 2 of us makes the job go so much smoother. We were sure to get an even coating of glue on each layer before adding the next. We then aligned the centres and put on a clamp to stop anything squirming while we got the ratchets in place. When we were near the correct bend, we put clamps on the ends before giving the ratchets a final tighten. We then found every small clamp that we owned and filled in the gaps. In hindsight, it would have been much smarter to use some clamping cools, but that didn't occur to us at the time. We were careful, however, to keep checking that things were square, and it was easy enough to see if things were going squint by standing at one end peering down the board. Then if they were a little out, we could just muscle them back straight again. After an overnight in the warm house, it was time to remove the clamps. We were a little nervous that it would spring straight again, or at least the layers would have voids, but the result turned out near perfect. I won't lie, a form probably would have produced a more perfect arc, but this is so close to perfect that we have nothing to complain about. Also, the laminations are faultless. We're very happy bunnies at this point. Also, we thought it would be a good idea to do a few tests at this stage, and we were very happy to see that it supported our weight easily. That was quite fun.
Oh, brilliant. I think that's great.
We then squared the ends on the miter saw. This was easier to 2-player as the arc made it tricky to manoeuvre the board against the bed and the fence of the saw at the same time. Again, we were a little nervous how the laminations might look when they were revealed, but again, they looked great. Now to taper the waist. We thought about doing this with a jigsaw, but that would be tricky on the arced surface and would likely produce a wobbly line. So instead we decided to use a thin piece of MDF that we could bend to the shape that we wanted and then use that as a guide for the router. With our favourite flush trim compression bit in the router, the cut was going brilliantly until Michael removed the clamp and then disaster struck. So that was going reasonably well until we removed that clamp and our guide just squirmed, and then, this happened, and obviously we've goosed that up. So we've had to think about how we can put this waist on, and I think we're actually just going to ditch that idea and just go with straight edges. So off camera, we are going to go and make another wobble board. Okay, so we've had the weekend to think about this, and we're going to attempt the waist again. New haircut, new plan. So what we're going to do is this top sheet, we're going to cut into the correct shape with the waist. We're then going to glue it up into the arc, and then using this top sheet as a template, we're going to cut the bottom sheets to the correct shape. So might be a terrible plan, might be a brilliant plan. Let's hope for the latter. Time to start again. Thankfully the wood for this project was cheap, so it's only a little time lost and a lesson well learnt. We'll use the same MDF trick, but this time only as a guide for a pencil line. We were careful here to draw the entire board shape a little inside the dimensions of the board. That way if we have a little squirm during the glue up, we'll still be able to cut it square with a nice clean edge. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. We then carefully cut to the line with the jigsaw, intentionally stopping just before the rounds at the corners. Later on, once everything's glued up, we'll come back and cut those corners, but we wanted to keep the edges square to make clamping easier during that glue up phase. It was the same process to glue up as in round 1, although it did seem to go a little smoother this time around. So practice does make perfect. Although we did still forget to use the clamping cools. One extra step we were careful with was clearing away any squeeze out between the top layer and the second, because we want that edge to be as crisp as possible for routering later. And here you can see nicely how the top layer should be a perfect guide for the router and why we wanted to keep that inside corner clear of any squeeze out. Inevitably there's still a bit of glue to clear away, so I just did this off camera with a chisel. We squared up the ends again at the miter saw to the pencil lines that we'd marked earlier, using a block this time instead of Michael to help with that awkward angle. Look at how lovely those laminations turned out again. So happy with how well it laminated. To trim the bottom 3 layers to match the top, we'll again be using our favourite flush trim compression bit. If you aren't familiar with spiral compression bits, they're well worth investing in. The spiral design puts much less force on the wood, which leaves a better finish and extends the life of the cutter. Additionally, the compress means that the cut is always away from the surface. This means little to no tear out and a great finish. We aren't sponsored by anyone, but we do thoroughly recommend this cutter, and there's affiliate links in the description box below to all the tools that we use. At this point, we're still pretty nervous about our chosen technique. The last thing that we want to do is start again. Setting the height of the cutter is key. We try to find the sweet spot where it's still high enough that the bearing has enough material to run against, but also low enough that the flutes of the cutter are still engaged with the wood. The first pass was a little rough because the bearing was running along the glue seam, but after lowering the cutter a fraction, I had another go, and this time it went beautifully. Oh, it's so nice when a plan comes to fruition, even if it is plan B. And now I can finally round those corners with the jigsaw. And a final sand to clean everything up. We'll be adding a round over to the whole board, but before we do that, we're going to paint the top surface. If we paint first and router second, we'll get a much crisper paint line. We would have loved more time to be more creative here, but given that this was our second attempt on the Wobble Board, time was not on our side. So instead we opted for a random pattern using masking tape. We then painted over it using wood paint. and removed the masking tape while the paint was still wet to reduce the chances of it bleeding. And ta-da! What do you reckon? Not too bad given we were so pressed for time, I think. For the round over, we used an 1/8 inch bit. The underside was straightforward and gave a great result. But the inside of the arc didn't go quite so well. I think because the base of the router was never at a consistent height from the board, it meant that it only periodically engaged and as such left a really messy result. The better solution was to go old-fashioned, crack out the sanding block and then hand sand around instead. And lastly, a couple of coats of varnish over the entire board. This is usually such a lovely varnish to use, but I think due to the cold temperatures in the workshop, it wasn't so nice to apply this time around. Once we finished our workshop reno and we have seals on the doors, we're going to crank up those heaters and hopefully this will make finishing a lot easier for us in the future. And for the finishing touch, we're going to put felt on the underside of the wobble board. This should protect our wooden floors as well as protecting the cheap ply veneer. Michael tried every pen that we own to mark on that non-stick surface, but nothing worked. So instead he had to settle for making an indent with a ballpoint pen. He then offset that line by 10mm and joined the dots. It was all very hard to see, but it did the job. He then cut around his invisible line, lined up the felt to the bottom of the board and clamped it into position. He then carefully began to stick the felt onto the board, moving up methodically so as to not accidentally go squint. We were left with a bit of a dilemma making this video. We needed to get footage of our son using the wobble board. It was meant to be a Christmas present and it's obviously not Christmas yet, but he loves it. It's his go-to toy. And now that he's spent a bit of time getting to grips with it, he is obsessed with bringing his bike on the board and rolling back and forth. He's a right wee daredevil. So I think he's played a good game and scored himself an early Christmas present from us. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you learned something new from this video or enjoyed watching our mistake on how not to make a wobble board, please consider giving us a thumbs up and a subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated as always. Thank you. Until next time, cheerio!